I said there would be a little bit of time for questions, and we kind of went on poll everywhere to look and see if anybody here in the room had questions. But the only person who had a question is actually my buddy Jeff. So I'm going to actually pass this. Sorry, so for the next round, so I'm going to speak a little bit here. I'm going to try to keep this short. If you've got questions for me, can you put them on poll everywhere, please? So login information is again on the notes sheet, and we're going to see if we can get this to work. Okay, if we don't get it to work after 2 rounds or so, we're going to do something else. But let's see if we can get this to work this way. What I'd like to do, see, that was Jeff's question. Anyway, so we're getting the next set here. So you just go to the next question. Yeah. So if you have questions for me, just please put them up there. And then my colleagues are going to kind of throw them at me. Okay, so if you can go back to my presentation. What I'd like to do is I think some of you may have seen the document that we put together, but I'd like to just give a little bit of context on why we're kind of doing this workshop and how I kind of came to this inclusive innovation piece. I guess I can click myself here. So innovation. So we've got a few groups here in the room. Some of you folks are actually really deep in innovation policy. Some of you come at this from other perspectives. So let me give you a little bit of the innovation person perspective on this. So from an innovation perspective, a lot of us are really excited about innovation, right? So this is popular mechanics, some of the top innovations over the last 25 years. So there's Mars rovers and Hadron Colliders. Somebody here in the room can probably explain what that is. We can think of Google Maps, which was kind of new not that long ago, right? Genome sequencing at incredible speeds or relatively and prices. Portable defibrillators, and the list goes on and on and on, right? So really cool things that actually we think make really good things happen for us individually, for society, for the economy, and so on, right? So a lot of us, when we first think about innovation, we get pretty excited. Anybody here with me on that? Right? Okay, and then we kind of start thinking about it a little bit more, and we kind of notice there may be some issues. So the car, when it was new, was pretty damn exciting, right? Now, then we kind of ran into some problems, right? Traffic was one of them. Road deaths was another one. And then we figured out there was this little kind of detail that had to do with greenhouse gases. So our combustion engines actually kind of caused a problem on a scale that we're actually not really aware of to begin with, right? So what we're finding is that we've got some problems, right? And I do poke fun a little bit at our neighbors to the south. This is the only one I will do, I promise. But what this one really highlights, it's when we kind of start looking at the issues that are caused by innovation. They're actually not just technological. So the greenhouse gas issue is an environmental issue. So it's a technology issue in terms of the greenhouse gases causing technological, chemical, whatever, physical problems. But actually the issue around that is it affects our environment, it affects our living environment, but it also actually raises a whole bunch of social concerns. We're finding that technology pathways are actually determined by social interactions. So going back to that car, that actually is an electric car. At the beginning, when they were starting to develop cars, it wasn't clear that it was going to be the combustion engine. It could have gone electric. There was steam, there's hydrogen. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could have happened. But we actually kind of went down a route that gave us the combustion engine and greenhouse gases. So what happens is when this all comes together, it's kind of a little bit funny maybe that, people think maybe we don't have a problem or we do. But what it tells us is that it shapes the social conceptualization of technology, the social interactions actually really shape what's happening. So it becomes a very, very complex project or conundrum, I guess. And in a way, I think it always has been, but I think we're at a time right now where people are actually really understanding that this is happening. We're understanding that this is happening not just at our local scale. For example, if you think of acid rain or the ozone layer, there were actually solutions, and we were actually able to address it, right? Acid rain, we kind of took care of that. The ozone hole is actually coming back. So there were actually technological solutions to this. The kind of stuff we're talking about right now, the social divides, global warming, health and aging, those are actually kind of global scale conundrums that actually will somehow require global scale responses. And that becomes a whole lot more complex than what we used to have. And that's where I think we really need everybody on board to figure this one out. If I can take one step back as to how we used to think of innovation, just for those of you who are not super familiar with this, but the innovation policy folks, a lot of economists as well, we used to have this really simple model of innovation. We used to think all you need to do is you throw a little bit of money at basic research, right? And then like the folks in their lab coats do their magic, right? And then somehow it'll get into the market and everybody's going to be happy because people will make money and there'll be social benefits, right? Just like that. Now, as I just said, it didn't quite work that way. It actually is kind of a lot more complex. So what happens is we don't just have like money, or we don't just have research as inputs. We actually have market thing, like consumers buy certain things, they don't buy others, right? There's stuff happening in the markets. Technology change, and then there's lock-ins in certain technology platforms, right? There's a pathway, how it all hangs together. There's social triggers. People talk about it, and they actually maybe don't like GMOs. And all of a sudden, that puts a kink into your commercialization. And then, obviously, there are environmental triggers, where we're kind of finding out that actually we only have one planet, and there's a limit to what we can do. And that kind of all becomes pretty complicated. And remember that researchers like myself, we do regression analyses. That's a statistical kind of method where you put like 5, maximum 10 variables in, and then you try to explain the rest of the world, right? And so we're trying to like do that to a system like this. It's not working very well, okay? So we kind of need new approaches. The other reason why this is not working is, or when people first started finding out this is not working, they came up with the systems concept. So we have innovation systems. So we figured out, okay, it's not this linear thing. It actually, we have all sorts of different players. They all play together. Universities play a role. Private sector plays a role. Governments play a role. Everybody has a role, okay? Now, we can't analyze that with regression analysis, so we have a problem to begin with. But the bigger problem actually here is this. This is changing. We have new actors, and our awareness of the new actors is changing. So when we thought innovation was coming out of the labs, it's not only. Like when we look at we have social innovators who actually innovate on a social level. We've got consumers who are innovating. We've got people doing open innovation, collaborating all across the board. We've got creative consumers out there. We've got philanthropists. We've got all sorts of new actors. I'm probably missing a gazillion people here still. But what I'm trying to show you is that it is really getting more complicated. And we've got to figure out new ways of doing this. And what we actually need is new ideas. And those new ideas are not going to come from people who do regression analyses. I mean, we might kind of be able to contribute a little bit, but we actually need everybody to pull together. We need everybody's ideas. We need everybody here in the room, and we need people who are not even in the room. And that's kind of what I'm thinking of in terms of inclusive innovation. We have some societal issues on a social level, on an environmental level, and actually, honestly, also on a commercial, on a business level. Capitalism, like people aren't as big on it as they used to be, right? So we actually have some things we need to address. My suggestion is that we kind of think of inclusive innovation as being one way of help us get new ideas and move forward. Inclusive innovation, I think, is going to involve 4 dimensions. Probably you're going to all find some other ways this can happen, but I'm throwing this out as a framework to kind of start with maybe. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we include people, activities, then we'll look at what's coming out of it and how we're going to do this. I am going to take another little moment to go over each of these categories. And by the way, Rachel has given me a gift of putting this on a wheel. I'm really quite pleased about that. So, and by the way, for all the folks here in the room who are as pale as I am, we don't start at the top. We start here, okay? This is kind of where the sun rises and all that. We kind of start here and go around the circle. All right, so let's start with people for a second. So we need to include people. We figured that out. All the opening remarks talked about that. I want to make 2 points in addition to what we've heard already. So absolutely, we need to include people who have historically been excluded. We've got to figure out a way to do that, and that's part of why we're here today. The other piece to this, though, is that it's not quite as simple as one might think, because there's intersectionality. We all belong to different groups. Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I'm disadvantaged. I happen to be a professor, which actually means I have a little bit of a platform. So that happens for pretty much everybody, right? There's intersectionality, and we kind of have to acknowledge that that is playing in. The other thing is, I think we need to not just look back. We obviously have to look back and take that into account. But if we think of innovation, if we think of, say, autonomous vehicles that are not even here yet, but people are worried that they will lose their jobs when they come. These people are worried right now. They're making decisions based on that worry right now. So that's actually a real factor. And, drivers are not all historically excluded people. There are actually some white males, for example, who are drivers and who are really worried about that. And we actually really have to take that seriously. It is a serious concern, and we need to bring that in. So we need to, find a way of bringing everybody into the fold who was historically excluded, but not at the expense of everybody else, but really think it through. What are innovations going to do, and who is going to be affected? And the beauty of that is if we bring everybody in, and if we think about the implications in that way, we actually won't cut people out, because that's what their worry is, right? So that's really the inclusiveness piece around people. Of course, we've got to involve people in a meaningful way. There's models that I will not go through. If anybody wants to look them up, you can do that. But I want to make one more point with regards to people. So how do we do this? It's easy when they're people we know. A lot of people here in the room I actually do know. It's easy to invite you all in. I'm really glad that there's some people here in the room who I didn't know, and so we bring that into the conversation. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you being here. The thing we need to really think about is, how do we include people who do not think like we do, who do not have like the same mental references, because that's what real inclusion means, right? That's where the real ideas are going to come from. That's where the real new developments are going to come from. And I'm just gonna give you one hint. I think it's probably clear, but it's not about educating them, right? If we want the ideas from other people, we kind of really need to listen. We need to find a way of figuring out what their concerns are, how they think, and how this all can come together. When we do that, we're actually going to think of innovation differently. It's not just going to be Silicon Valley-style gadgets, but we actually are going to look at cultural innovation. We're going to look at behavioral innovation. We see a lot of business model innovation. We see social innovation. All these innovation types are going to become relevant. And what happens is when we acknowledge that, we're actually going to think of different people as innovative as well. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. The other piece that's going to happen when we bring everybody in is we're going to think of the benefits from innovation differently. It's not all just going to be about profits. If you ask the youth what they would need from innovation, right now, a lot of them would tell you environmental impacts, positive environmental impacts, right? If you ask many communities, they want community social benefits, right? So the moment we bring everybody in, we're actually going to have to deliver different impacts with innovation. And then finally, when we get this all right, when we actually do find a way of bringing everybody in, we'll need to do governance differently. We need to find ways of doing innovation differently, doing it together, and we don't actually know how to do that yet. So those are some of the things we need to figure out. Is anybody discouraged? Hope not. Right? So there are lots of opportunities in this. There are lots of opportunities to come up with new ideas that we really need and that I think a lot of us want. And what the rest of the day is about here today is to hear a start on those. We have a wonderful list of speakers whom we're going to ask to come up in just a second. And each one of them brings a different perspective. Each one of them brings different examples and different starting points for how we can actually make inclusive innovation work. All right, so I'm going to leave it right here and ask our speakers to come up. And then do we have any questions? Hold on, I'm looking at the system first, on. We do have a question. Okay. So I'm going to just run around here. This is the only awkward moment. When you're all up there, I can ask you the questions. Okay, so we have a question.
More statements for innovation diversity is good, but
So,
management and innovation management training.
what about management, innovation, and training? So, the questions that I'm seeing there right now, they're actually kind of detailed question about, like, how do we do this? What about management training? How about innovation? Some of these things we haven't figured out yet. But here's what I'm gonna say actually to those specific questions that I very quickly saw there. I really appreciate you putting them on there. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna hear from speakers some first pieces. We're gonna hear about education a little bit. We're gonna hear about training. We're going to hear also from a number of people in the second session about management approaches. So I'm going to take those questions and I'm going to bring them back into the wrap-up session because I actually think some of them will be answered during the day. So my apologies for skipping out on that question, on those questions, but I think that's the best way to go, okay? So with that, we only have like a minute or two to switch over and ask our first panel to come up. If you want to quickly grab a coffee, that's okay, but we don't have like an official break or anything right now. We'll have that after our first session. All right? Thank you very much.